The rain poured down in torrents, turning the usually peaceful town of Riverside into a raging floodplain. Houses were submerged and streets became rivers as the residents scrambled to higher ground. Among them was Mr. Benson, a jovial man who owned the town's best-known bakery. "Well, there goes my bread," he chuckled as the floodwaters swept through his shop. His wife, Mrs. Benson, sighed but couldn't help but laugh at her husband's eternal optimism. Meanwhile, little Timmy, their neighbor, was busy trying to save his collection of toy boats by sending them off on the floodwaters. "Look, Mom, my boats are actually sailing," he shouted excitedly, unaware of the chaos around him. As the flood worsened, the town's mayor, Mr. Anderson, called for an emergency meeting. "We need to evacuate to higher ground immediately," he declared, but not before finishing his coffee. The townsfolk gathered at the local church, which stood on the highest hill in Riverside. Father O'Malley welcomed them with open arms and a pot of hot cocoa. "Nothing like a warm drink to lift your spirits," he said with a smile. Despite the dire situation, the church was filled with laughter and chatter. Old Mrs. Jenkins, known for her love of knitting, started making blankets for everyone. "We may be wet, but at least we'll be warm," she quipped. The children, unaware of the gravity of the situation, turned the church's hall into a playground. They slid down the pews and played hide and seek behind the altar. As night fell, the floodwaters continued to rise, and the townspeople huddled together for warmth. Mr. Benson, ever the optimist, began telling stories to keep everyone's spirits up. "Did I ever tell you about the time I baked a cake the size of a car?" he began. The children, wide-eyed, listened intently as he wove his tale. Even the adults couldn't help but smile at Mr. Benson's exaggerated stories. The next morning, the floodwaters had reached their peak, but the church remained safe. Mr. Anderson, the mayor, suggested they use this time to explore the town's natural beauty. "We may be trapped, but that doesn't mean we can't enjoy ourselves," he said with a wink. The townsfolk agreed, and they set off on a tourist expedition around the church grounds. They marveled at the waterfalls cascading down the hillsides and the way the sunlight danced on the water. Even in the midst of disaster, the beauty of nature was undeniable. Mrs. Benson, inspired by the scenery, began sketching the landscape. "This will make a lovely painting once we're back home," she mused. The children found a shallow pool where they could wade and splash around. "This is the best vacation ever," one of them exclaimed, much to the adults' amusement. As the day wore on, the townsfolk shared stories of their travels and adventures. Mr. Anderson regaled them with tales of his backpacking trip through Europe. Father O'Malley spoke of his pilgrimage to the Holy Land, where he had met people from all walks of life. Even old Mrs. Jenkins had a story to tell about her journey to the Grand Canyon many years ago. Each story was met with laughter, applause, and a renewed sense of camaraderie. Despite the flood, the people of Riverside realized that they were fortunate to have each other. The following day, the flood waters began to recede, and the townsfolk ventured out to assess the damage. The town was a mess, but the spirit of the people remained unbroken. Mr. Benson's bakery was ruined, but he shrugged it off with a smile. "I'll just have to bake an even bigger cake to celebrate our recovery," he declared. The townsfolk cheered at his determination and optimism. Mrs. Benson decided to hold an art exhibition of her flood sketches to raise funds for rebuilding the town. "We can turn this disaster into something beautiful," she said, and everyone agreed. Timmy, inspired by his toy boats, decided to build a real one with the help of his father. "We'll sail down the river and explore new places once everything is back to normal," he said excitedly. The mayor, Mr. Anderson, led the efforts to clean up and rebuild Riverside. We may have been knocked down, but we'll get back up stronger than ever, he declared. The townspeople worked together, side by side, to restore their homes and businesses. As they cleaned up the debris, they found moments of joy and laughter amidst the hard work. Father O'Malley organized a community potluck to celebrate their progress. "Let's take a moment to appreciate how far we've come," he said, raising his glass. The church bells rang out, signaling the start of the feast. The townsfolk gathered around tables laden with food, sharing stories and memories. Old Mrs. Jenkins presented everyone with the blankets she had knitted during the flood. "A little something to remember this time by," she said with a smile. As the sun set, the people of Riverside stood on the church hill, looking out over their town. The flood had taken much, but it had also given them a new appreciation for life and each other. Mr. Benson, ever the optimist, raised his glass. "Here's to Riverside, may we always rise above the waters, stronger and closer than before." The townsfolk cheered and clinked their glasses, toasting to their resilience and unity. The following days were filled with hard work, but also with a sense of purpose and hope. The town slowly began to come back to life, with businesses reopening and homes being rebuilt. Mrs. Benson's art exhibition was a huge success, raising more than enough money to fund the town's recovery efforts. Her paintings of the flood, filled with both beauty and devastation, touched the hearts of everyone who saw them. Timmy's boat, now fully constructed, was launched on the river with much fanfare. The townspeople gathered to watch as it sailed smoothly down the water, a symbol of their perseverance. Mr. Anderson, the mayor, continued to lead with compassion and determination. He made sure that every resident had what they needed to rebuild their lives. Father O'Malley offered words of comfort and encouragement to those who were struggling. "Remember, it's not about what we've lost, but about what we've gained through each other," he said. Old Mrs. Jenkins, despite her age, continued to knit blankets and scarves for anyone in need. "It's my way of giving back to the town that has given me so much," she said with a smile. As the weeks went by, Riverside began to feel like home again. The scars of the flood were still visible, but they were overshadowed by the strength of the community. Mr. Benson reopened his bakery with a grand celebration, featuring the largest cake the town had ever seen. The townsfolk gathered to enjoy the delicious treats and to celebrate their journey from tragedy to triumph. Mrs. Benson's art continued to inspire, reminding everyone of the beauty that can be found in even the darkest times. Timmy's boat became a symbol of hope as it sailed down the river each day, carrying with it the dreams of the town. Mr. Anderson's leadership earned him the respect and admiration of everyone in Riverside. He was re-elected as mayor in a landslide, with the townsfolk grateful for his guidance during the flood. Father O'Malley's church remained a beacon of hope and a gathering place for the community. Every Sunday, the church was filled with laughter, singing, and the warmth of friendship. Old Mrs. Jenkins continued to be the heart of the town, her knitting needles clicking away as she shared stories and wisdom. The people of Riverside knew that they had been through something extraordinary together. The flood had tested them, but it had also brought them closer than ever before. They had learned to find joy in the little things, to appreciate each other, and to never give up hope. As they stood together on the church hill, looking out over their beloved town, they knew that Riverside would always be a place of resilience and love. The flood had come and gone, but the spirit of Riverside would endure forever. Mr. Benson, ever the optimist, looked out at the town and smiled. "We've been through a lot, but we've come out stronger on the other side," he said. The townsfolk nodded in agreement, their hearts full of pride and gratitude. They had faced the flood together, and together they had risen above it. Riverside was more than just a town, it was a family, bound by love, laughter, and the strength to overcome any challenge. As the sun set on another day in Riverside, the people knew that they could face anything as long as they had each other. And so, with hearts full of hope and determination, they looked forward to the future. For they knew that no matter what came their way, they would always rise above it. The flood may have changed their lives, but it had also shown them the power of community and the importance of never giving up. And in the end, that was the greatest gift of all.